The future of modern architecture is in the minds of the men who made it. When we tape recorded an informal conversation with architect Ernest Kump in San Francisco, he had this to say.
I believe the great trend in materials of architecture is towards what I call the strength-weight ratio, the lowering of the weight of a material with respect to the strength. Well, I think it all ties in with making available better buildings and a higher standard of building for more people. As we see it today out here, industrial buildings have become packaged commodities now of standardized design. And I think that is a great aspect of our economy, because it's the only way we can raise, for most people, raise the standard of architecture through the same technique that we use in our food and our clothing, our transportation, and so forth. And I believe that we're going to go a step further than modular parts. I think the building is going to become the module. We're going to, it will not be long before we have standard modular buildings that can be adapted to any space use. Our requirements in building spaces have become standardized by the very social development of this country. For instance, they design automobiles that meet the needs of 90% of people, suits of clothes, dresses, and so forth. The same things happened in architecture. They found 90% of the people want the same space requirements. There's a common denominator that meets a very high percentage. Same in schools, it's the same in hospitals, it's the same in industrial work, it's the same in apartment buildings, it's the same in office buildings. The important thing is how little the differences are. It's going to make planning possible, because you can't plan unless you have a basic unit with which you plan. Planning cities will be realized. Pre-designed buildings will give unity to whole communities. Variety within this unity, tremendous variety, no limitation, and yet a complete order. The order that you have in the cities of Europe, in which the vocabulary was the same, but it was expressed in many, many ways, the basic elements, and you sense the unity in the towns, which appeals to anyone. We have no unity today. Just drive up any of our streets. And the idea that there can't be variety with unity is entirely wrong. There can't be, there's only chaos without it.
New York's Gordon Bunshaft, partner in charge of design at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, thought,
in this country, buildings are no longer being built to last 500 years. There are no longer monuments that are built and that the interior's purposes change with each generation, such as some of the structures in Paris, London. Today, the economics of our civilization and the increasing requirements of comfort, technical comfort, demanded by the people, are making buildings obsolete 20 to 25 years. This change, I think, is going to have a basic effect eventually on the design and theories of architecture. As far as the technical aspects of development, there's no question that we must develop a method of building these buildings precisely, lightly, and quickly. And this, of course, leads to prefabrication. Today, the buildings are primarily being built as they were 40 years ago. Just the skins are different, but the basics construction is the same. Tons of cement, tons of water, tons of sand, tons of bricks are moved up and down structures the same old way they did when they built the Woolworth building.
Philip Johnson in New York and Eero Saarinen in Detroit had parallel and pertinent things to say about the great masters of modern architecture.
Three great works. I would pick the three as the Marseille apartments of Le Corbusier, Taliesin west of Wright, and the 860 Lakeshore Drive Towers of Mies van der Rohe. Now, the first, the Marseille apartments, why? Because he carries as far as possible aesthetic experimentation in the modern style. The modern style of architecture is one in which we emphasize the weightlessness, the lightness, the inherent characteristic of skeleton construction. Corbusier has carried that much further than anybody else by holding the building up on great expressive hands, almost expressionistic. And then above it he has a reticulation. He's carried his glass back, not to make this eternal flat skin effect that all modern buildings in New York seem to get by trying to keep the outer walls thin for economic reasons. He's pushed them way back 20 feet sometimes to keep the hollow honeycomb-like effect of the entire building. Then, thirdly and most important, he's carried sculptural effects on the roof materials to such a degree that if you were just to consider it large sculpture, it would still count. It does seem to me there's no contradiction between architecture and sculpture. An architect has a perfect right to make sculptural forms out of his needs, as Corbusier does out of his chimneys, to make an expressive unity to bind the whole composition together against the sky.
Corbu gave it form. He is the Bible of the form of modern architecture, and because his books are like the sketches of Leonardo da Vinci, and Gropius rightly refers to him as the Leonardo da Vinci of our time. So this terrific inventiveness, he can almost take any theme and by dramatization and emphasis of that make a whole architecture out of it, and in that way sort of find form more or less in functional, but don't think of him as one that finds the form alone in the functional, because basically it's in his heart. Buildings like Marseille are, to me, very strong influences. Here for 20 or 30 years, we've made thinner and thinner sticks and so forth, more or less on the basis of Corbu. Then he comes along and makes sort of an elephantine, strong, massive building like that, and complete reversal of a trend. To me personally, the interesting lessons I get from him is every problem has its own solution. And architecture is not just a mold, a formula to be found, but it's sort of a whole way of thinking, and also the plastic form that he brings in relation to geometric form or to the crystalline form are all, fields that we haven't begun to explore yet. Sculpture is fine, but don't ever forget structure. And that's where Mise comes in. So much of Corbu's architecture was really arrived at from the painting, from the Cubist painting world, that in his work, the structural quality of the building is not emphasized, and when imitated, often forgotten. But with Mise, who came here late in life, absorbed America during the war years, and then his work bloomed into a great number of buildings, and all with this very, very strong, Spartan, almost religious belief in structure. I see it almost a continuation of the Gothic, Viollet-le-Duc, Sullivan, Mise. The principle and the belief that structure is the important thing that influences structures, that the use of a building can change, but the structure always stays. There are many ways of being influenced by Mise, and many have said that General Motors is the project where I've been most influenced by him. I would say that I've been most influenced by Mise in the MIT auditorium, not by his form, but by his principles. Whether you use concrete or steel, or whether you use this box or a dome, those are details. But the principle of making structure the dominant element in architecture and letting the functional ones fit in and be controlled by the structural ones to a degree is a Mise principle.
Mise knows all about building. He knows before he puts a line to paper how it's going to look. But he also knows what's possible. He also knows what you have to admit is going to have to be put in the building before you do it. And then he realizes more than that. He realizes what civilization we're in. You can't repeat Marseille. Who is going to be able to build something of the processional incredibleness of Taliesin West? But everyone can, and mostly does, build apartment houses. And the patterns which he has developed for sheathing the skeleton building is the first, yes, certainly is the first step in this economic problem, cum architectural problem, since Sullivan, who first used verticality to organize multi-story buildings. It's amusing to realize that the multi-story building is quite a new problem in architecture. Sullivan was the first to grapple with it. Richardson only built buildings 5 or 6 stories high that were still blown up one-story houses. That warehouse, the Marshall Field warehouse, one-story building. But the Wainwright is a skyscraper. And the Wainwright thesis of the base, the vertical columns, the pilasters almost, and the heavy cornice have been copied ever since, because it is the logical way to sheathe a multi-story building if it goes up is with vertical emphasis. Mies, of course, doesn't know this. He's never seen any Sullivan work. It's a pure accident, but it isn't an accident because the problem is the same. That Mies solves in the technique of our day what Sullivan solves in the technique of his. And that is a basic pattern from which it is extremely difficult to diverge. Many of us have tried. To say, when I look, I just mustn't have those exposed mullions that create that wonderful impression at 860. But the more you try to make a building cheap, and the more you try to make it expressive, the more closely to 860 you're going to end up. Taliesin West, of course, is quite a different matter. Frank Lloyd Wright belongs to the ages. There, I think, the essence of his house is the human element, the procession through the building. I once counted the turns that you make. You approach the building till you get into what he calls the cove, and the number of turns, I think, was 45. Now, he is playing with you as you walk through that space. He stops your car, as any good architect should, 200 or 300 feet from the entrance. It doesn't rain enough to make any difference. But then you start down the steps, up the steps, to the left, to the right, down a long, very long pergola, and you turn to the right to get out onto that famous prow, and you take those few steps down onto the magnificent view that you've been concealed. It's been concealed from you for 200 or 300 feet of walking. Okay? Then you see Arizona stretched out as he meant it to you. And then you turn and go into the little tent room where the man, of course, understands light better than anybody in the world, and he has this tent light that trickles, filters down through into this private room before he opens any flaps. You're just bathed in this canvas light. Then when he opens the flap on the little secret garden, you say, there are no more surprises. There can't be any more unfolding of spaces. But there are. And you get into this private courtyard with the green grass and the falling water, which I notice he's just changed. He now has a series of round circular pads surrounding the seat. And then you finally get into the cove, and just when you're used to Frank Lloyd Wright's 6-foot ceiling, it has a 14-foot ceiling. And the fireplace runs the full length of the building. There are no windows all of a sudden, and no canvas. You're entirely enclosed in the middle of this experience. And by the time you get there, you realize that you've been handled and twisted much as a symphony will until you get to the crisis. That perhaps is not even architecture in the same sense that the Corbusier building is, but they both have something to tell later architects.
Wright has given us the greatest inspiration about use of space, has also shown us the plastic form of architecture, architecture in relation to nature, architecture in relation to the material, and to a certain degree to structure. And he has shown us also the dramatization of architecture, which I think is a very important thing. Some try in their work to be influenced by him directly. I could never do that, and I think that's wrong. His influence on one is and should be much more not through the form itself, but through the philosophy, the principles, and maybe enthusiasm behind his forms. And I think it may well be that 50 years from now we will sort of feel him stronger amongst us than right now. We live too close to him now. That is the way I look at Wright, and I think of Wright as the greatest living architect. well, I might add one little thing to that, that so much of Wright's forms are really of quite a different era, and the young architect and the student who isn't aware of that sort of slides right into that, and wrongly so. But boy, don't ever underestimate Wright. Then Wright hasn't really been integrated into architecture yet. And I think that's the wisest statement I've said today. I think Wright's contribution has not yet been integrated into modern architecture.